This is a read aloud of the 903 unit test. Alexander Dumas's novel The Count of Monte Cristo is set in France in the early 1800s, during Napoleon Bonaparte's reign, exile, and brief return to power. Edmond Dantes is the first mate on the ship of the Pharaon. While at sea, the captain dies and Dantes brings the ship safely into port. The ship owner is impressed by Dantes' performance and promotes him. Dantes is thrilled and is anxious to marry his beloved Mercedes, who lives in the Spanish district of Les Catalans Danglars. The ship's accountant envies Dantes' success. Fernand, a local fisherman, is jealous because he is in love with Mercedes. The two men accuse Dantes of treason, and he is sentenced to prison. Excerpt from The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. A weather-worn wall about 100 paces from the spot where the two friends sat looking and listening as they drank their wine, was the village of the Catalans. Long ago this mysterious colony quitted Spain and settled on the tongue of land on which it is to this day. Hence it came no one knew, and it spoke an unknown tongue. One of its chiefs, who understood Provençal, begged the commune of Marseille to give them this bare and barren promontory, where, like the sailors of old, they had run their boats ashore. The request was granted, and 3 months afterwards, around the 12 or 15 small vessels which had brought these gypsies of the sea, a small village sprang up. This village, constructed in a singular and picturesque manner, half Moorish, half Spanish, still remains and is inhabited by descendants of the first comers, who speak the language of their fathers. For 3 or 4 centuries they have remained upon the small promontory, on which they have settled like a flight of sea-birds, without mixing with the Marseillais population, intermarrying and preserving their original customs and the costume of their mother country as they have preserved its language. Our readers will follow us along the only street of this little village, and enter with us one of the houses, which is sunburned to the beautiful dead leaf color peculiar to the buildings of the country, and within coated with whitewash like a Spanish posada. A young and beautiful girl with hair as black as jet, her eyes as velvety as the gazelle's, was leaning with her back against the wainscot, rubbing in her slender, delicately molded fingers a bunch of heath blossoms, the flowers of which she was picking off and strewing on the floor. Her arms, bare to the elbow, brown and mottled after those of the Arlesian Venus, moved with a kind of restless impatience, and she tapped the earth with her arched and supple foot, so as to display the pure and full shape of her well-turned leg, in its red cotton, gray and blue clocked stocking. At 3 paces from her, seated in a chair which he balanced on 2 legs, leaning his elbow on an old worm-eaten table, was a tall young man of 20, or 22, who was looking at her with an air in which vexation and uneasiness were mingled. He questioned her with his eyes, but the firm and steady gaze of the young girl controlled his look. "You see, Mercedes," said the young man, "here is Easter come round again. Tell me, is this the moment for a wedding?" "I have answered you 100 times, Fernand, and really you must be very stupid to ask me again." "Well, repeat it, I beg of you, that I may at last believe it. Tell me for the 100th time that you refuse my love, which had your mother's sanction. Make me understood once for all that you are trifling with my happiness, that my life or death are nothing to you. Ah, to have dreamed for 10 years of being your husband, Mercedes, and to lose that hope, which was the only stay of my existence." "At least it was not I who ever encouraged you in that hope, Fernand," replied Mercedes. "You cannot reproach me with the slightest coquetry. I have always said to you, I love you as a brother. But do not ask from me more than sisterly affection, for my heart is another's. Is not this true, Fernand?" "Yes, this is very true, Mercedes," replied the young man. "Yes, you have been cruelly frank with me. But do you forget that it is among the Catalans a sacred law to intermarry?" "You mistake, Fernand. It is not a law, but merely a custom, and I pray of you, do not cite this custom in your favor. You are included in the conscription, Fernand, and are only at liberty on sufferance, liable at any moment to be called upon to take up arms. Once a soldier, What would you do with me, a poor orphan, forlorn, without fortune, with nothing but a half-ruined hut and a few ragged nets and miserable inheritance, left by my father to my mother, and by my mother to me? She has been dead a year, and you know, Fernand, I have subsisted almost entirely on public charity. Sometimes you pretend I am useful to you, and that is an excuse to share with me the produce of your fishing, and I accept it, Fernand, because you are the son of my father's brother, because you were brought up together, and still more because it would give you so much pain if I refuse. But I feel very deeply that this fish which I go and sell, and with the produce of which I buy the flax I spin, I feel very keenly, Fernand, that this is charity. Question 1. According to details in this excerpt, which cultural experience do Mercedes and Fernand most likely have in common? A. Living in a small community that has little contact with the surrounding peoples. B. Surviving on the charity of others because of poverty. C. Feeling that love is the most important thing in young people's lives. Question 2. Based on this scene, which cultural experience poses the most likely risk to Fernand? A. Being forced to become a soldier. B. Being prevented from marrying his true love. C. Having to live on the charity of his relatives. Question 3. How has the interaction between Mercedes and Fernand been affected by their cultural experience? A. Their culture's rules about charity force Mercedes to depend on Fernand. B. Their culture's marriage customs give Fernand an excuse to pursue Mercedes. C. Their culture's rules of inheritance result in Mercedes inheriting very little from her mother. Question 4. Read this sentence from the passage. Long ago, this mysterious colony quitted Spain and settled on the tongue of land on which it is to this day. How do the words quitted Spain affect the meaning of the passage? A. They highlight for the reader the fact that the people of Catalans persevere. B. They show the reader that the people of Catalans give up easily. C. They tell the reader that the people of Catalans are of Spanish origin. Question 5. How does Dumas develop the theme that true love is more important than custom? A. By the fact that Mercedes points out that intermarrying is custom and not law. B. By having Fernand profess his love and cite the Catalan sacred law. C. By showing Mercedes reject Fernand's proclamation of love in favor of Dante's. Question 6. Which statement best explains how the phrase, her arms, bare to the elbow, brown and modeled after those of the Arlesian Venus, impacts the meaning of the story? A. It illustrates Mercedes' beauty and explains why Fernand is so in love with her. B. It emphasizes how Mercedes looks like a villager of the Catalans and therefore should only marry someone from the Catalans. C. It highlights the importance of beauty to the villagers of Catalans, especially among the women. Question 7. Which statement best explains how the phrase, tell me for the 100th time, impacts the tone of the story? A. It creates an exasperated tone by showing that Fernand is angry with Mercedes for not marrying him. B. It creates a sarcastic tone by showing that Mercedes is toying with Fernand. C. It creates a desperate tone by showing that Fernand still can't believe Mercedes doesn't want to marry him. Question 8. Read this excerpt from the passage. Tell me for the 100th time that you refuse my love, which had your mother's sanction. How does the word sanction best affect the meaning of the passage? A. It indicates that Mercedes' mother allowed Fernand to seek Mercedes' heart. B. It illustrates that Mercedes' family approved of Fernand, so she should love him. C. It shows that Mercedes and Fernand have a relationship cursed by Mercedes' mother. Question 9. Read this excerpt from the passage. Yes, you have been cruelly frank with me. How does the word cruelly frank best affect the meaning of the passage? A. They show that Mercedes is too honest with Fernand. B. They show that Mercedes has been excessively mean to Fernand in withholding her affection. C. They show that Fernand doesn't understand the truth about how Mercedes feels about him.